Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our Swift programming tutorial series, and in this particular tutorial we're going to be taking a look at closures. Now, what exactly are closures? Well, closures are self-contained blocks of code that can be assigned to variables and constants, as well as passed around through functions using them as parameters for a function. Alright? So that's pretty much what that does, really. There's really not much to it. The other thing about closures is that it will capture and copy variables and constants from the scope in which it's been defined, and allow you to use them inside of the body of the closure. So if you have a variable called x in the same scope that the closure is defined in, then that variable will be then you'll be able to use that variable inside of that closure. Alright? So, how do we assign a closure to a variable then? Because I mentioned you can do that. Well, inside of Xcode, we can say something like var product equals, and we can have an open and closing curly brace. And inside of the body of this closure, we can say print 2 times 2, let's say. We can save this. Now, how do we invoke this closure? Well, we can invoke the closure the same way that we invoke a normal function, and that's by saying product, open and closing parenthesis, save, run, and there we go. We get 4 printed to the console, and that's great and all. But what if I want this closure to take in some parameters? What if I wanted to take in 2 parameters in particular? Well, to do that, we can say var product equals opening and closing curly bracket. After our left bracket, we need to have a space, open and closing parenthesis, and then in here we can define the parameters that we want. So we'll say a as an integer and b as an integer. After the parentheses, we need the in keyword. And that's it for the closure definition. Okay? Inside of the body of our closure, we can say return a times b. Then we can print the result of our closure. But how do we call the closure with parameters? Just like we did with the one without parameters. Product, and just pass it some parameters in the parentheses. So we'll say 3 and 4. Save it, run, and we get 12 printed to the console. Pretty cool. Now, one thing I want to show you here too is if we pass this closure an array, okay, an array of integers, so var product equals, we'll say numbers colon an array of integers in there is a specific method on our array here that we can call, okay, to do this. Now, this method takes in a closure. This method is called the reduce method. And this method is meant to combine all of the values of an array into a single value. So you can add all of the numbers together, you can multiply them together, you can divide them all, stuff like that. You can do your own custom stuff with it too, as long as it results in a single value. This method takes in the initial start value, which we're going to say is 0, and then the second parameter it takes is a closure. The cool thing about closures, when you're passing them to a method like we're going to do, is that you can either A, just pass a function itself as the parameter to a closure, as in a reference to a function, or if the closure is the last parameter in a function call, which it is with reduce, you can get rid of that parameter entirely and have the closure be outside of the parameters at the very end of the call. Now we're going to do the former, where we're going to pass a function into the reduce method as its closure. However, we're not going to make our own custom function just for looping through the array and returning a single value and then passing that function into reduce. No. We're going to pass the multiplication operator, the star, because operators in Swift are functions. All right. So, inside of the body of this closure, if what I said at all confused you, that's fine. We're gonna take a look at that. So, inside of the body of the closure, we are going to say return I should probably make sure we're returning an int. So do our little return here in the definition and say int like that. All right. Now in the body, we're going to say return numbers dot reduce. Now, inside of the parentheses for reduce, we need to first pass it the initial value to build on, which is 0. And then we're going to pass it the multiplication operator. Go ahead and save that code. And we can print product. And we'll pass it an array of integers right now. So we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4. Save it, run it, and there we go. We get the product of 1 times 2 times 3 times 4. So 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 4 is 24. Pretty simple stuff right there, right? There are other methods that we can use in the for an array, such as map, filter, and for each. We'll take a look at those here in a second. But let's go ahead and create our own function that takes in a closure. We're gonna create 2 functions. We're gonna create one function that takes in a closure that doesn't have any parameters, and then one that does. So for the one that does have parameters, let's say func calculate sum. This calculate sum function is going to take in a closure, and this closure is going to be called perform. And for the type annotation, it's going to be parentheses. Inside of these parentheses, there's going to be another set of parentheses. Inside of those parentheses, we're going to give the type of parameter that we want in this closure. So it's going to be, so this closure is going to take an array of integers. This closure is then going to return an int as well. The calculate sum method is going to also return an int like this. All right, so now that is our calculate sum method signature. Again, the function is called calculate sum. It has a parameter called perform, and this perform is a closure that takes in an array of integers and spits out a single integer. Okay? Cool. And then calculate sum will return an integer on its own as well. So, inside of this method, we can define an array of integers. So var integer array equals, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So we have an array of 20 integers, 1 through 20. Here we can call perform by saying var result equals perform in integer array and then we will return result like that. All right. Now, we can go ahead and call this method by saying var sum equals calculate sum. And because the closure is the only parameter inside of the calculate sum method, we can omit that entirely, like that. like we just did here, and use trailing closure syntax. That's what this is called. It makes your code a lot easier to read, actually, and a lot more concise. Now, in here, we need to also specify the parameter that that this takes. So after the opening curly brace, we need numbers in. Now, numbers can be whatever you want. It can be X, it can be A, it can be whatever name you want to give it. But after the parameter name, we need to give it the in keyword, like that. So now it's var sum equals calculate sum numbers in, and then in the side of our body, we are going to again call the reduce method, but we're going to pass it the plus this time around, and we can say return numbers dot reduce 0, plus, just like that. Save that, and we can print sum just like that. Save it, run it, and now we get the result of adding all of those numbers together. All right. So that's how we can create a function that takes in a closure, which the closure itself takes in a parameter as well. What if we want to create a function that takes in a closure that doesn't take in any parameters and doesn't return anything? That's a common question as well. Well, we can do that by saying func. Let's call this perform some action. Inside of the parentheses for the function signature, we're going to give it a closure, so open and closing parentheses again. And inside of those parentheses, we give it another set of parentheses, our little return arrow, and void with a capital V. And open up the method. So what did we just do here? Well, we have, you know what? I forgot to give it a parameter name as well. Perform. There we go. So what we did is we created a function called perform some action. This function takes in a closure. This closure does not take in any parameters and doesn't return anything. So therefore we have to tell it, hey, you're going to return void, which is to say nothing. Okay? So that is our closure. In here we can just call perform. Like that. And that is our function. We can then say perform some action, do our trailing closure syntax, and say print we have performed some kind of action here. Save it, run it, and we have performed some kind of action inside of our console. So that's how you can pass in a closure that returns nothing and takes in no parameters. Finally, let's take a look at those other array methods I told you about. For each, filter, and map. So let's say we have an array of integers. But this, we want this array of integers to be turned into an array of strings. Okay? So we say var, we'll call this x, an array of integers equals 1, 2, 3. All right. We can go ahead and what we can do to turn these integers into strings, we can call the map method of our array. This map method takes in one parameter, and that parameter is a closure for the kind of mapping mutation sort of operation we want to perform. And map will then return the resulting array where we've mapped all of our items to something else. So we can say var mapped array equals x dot map. Make sure we have our left brace here. And we'll say current int in. We can now, inside of the body of our closure for our map here, we can say return current int we can say, instead of just current int, I guess, we can return a string with current int and item number, and then have our little integer there. Now map will return an array of strings because we have gone and converted our integers into an array of strings. We've mapped them to an array of strings. We can then use the for each method to loop through it. So to do this, we can actually chain these. So go to the right brace after our for each, or our map. And you can go ahead and do something like dot for each. So let's get rid of the variable assignment, actually, because we're not going to need it. So here we just have x.map. And then now we're going to do a dot for each. And for each also takes a closure as its only parameter. For each, with its closure, also takes in one parameter, and that is the current, that's the current index, or rather not index, but the current element we're on. So current element in, like that. we can print current element. Save it and run our code. Now we get item number 1, 2, and 3 printed to our console. And you can see just how compact that code was. If we would have to write many more lines of code if we wanted to achieve this before we knew anything about these for each, reduce, and map methods. But there is another one. Okay? There is another method that we can use here. And that is the filter method. Filter allows you to, as the name implies, filter an array into only elements that meet a specific condition. So this is another one of those methods that returns an array, much like map did. Reduce returned a single value, and for each doesn't return anything. Okay? So let's go ahead and create an array of integers. So var x equals, we'll say 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Let's say I want to create a new array that contains only the numbers that are greater than 10 but less than 20. Well, we can do this by saying var filtered array equals x.filter Now we can see a couple different versions of this, or rather just one. This takes a closure that takes in one integer. In this case, because our array is an integer, it takes in one parameter, and that is the current element pretty much. We can get rid of these parentheses and have our little filter here. But in this method, I'm going to show you something different. We are not going to specify a parameter here. And the reason for that is because we technically don't have to. When we call map, filter, reduce, and for each, you don't need to specify the parameters that it takes with the in keyword for the closures that they take in, necessarily. Swift also allows you to use certain placeholder values, such as $0, $1, $2, to represent those parameters, so you don't have those parameter labels cluttering up your code. And to do this, to use this, we can just say $0, let's say, is greater than 10, and $0 is less than 20. Now we can do filtered array dot for each, and we're going to use the placeholder here as well. So instead of defining current element in or whatever you want your parameter to be, put nothing there, and we can say print $0. Save and run your code. You can see it works just fine, and we get all of our values that are greater than 10 but less than 20. So that pretty much does it for this video on closures, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.